Well, good evening and welcome to the show. I'm James McPherson. Let's get into it. Here's what's coming up tonight. Dozens of homes destroyed and tens of thousands still without power. It begs the question, should the Bureau of Meteorology have given better warnings about those southeast Queensland storms? TikTok in the spotlight again. The privacy watchdog launches an inquiry into the social media giant over the handling of personal information. Plus, why the response to British actor Stephen Fry's Christmas message confirms that Jew hate has returned with vengeance. Spiked chief political writer Brendan O'Neill will join me to discuss. But first, was Jesus Palestinian? And while we're at it, was Moses Chinese? I'm joking, of course. Everyone knows Moses was Italian. But what of Jesus? Anti-Israeli protesters, both here in Australia and overseas, have hijacked Christmas to claim that Jesus was not in fact a Jew, but a Palestinian. Check out this graffiti at Bondi Beach on Christmas morning. Jesus was Palestinian, it says. And listen to these protesters disrupting a Santa Claus display at a major shopping centre in Toronto just a few days ago.
Free Palestine! Jesus was Palestinian! 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 Free Palestine!
Now, immediately after October 7, we were told Hamas terrorists were resistance fighters. Then we were told that Osama bin Laden made some really good points. And now we're being told that Jesus was Palestinian. What next? Will they claim Aristotle was Palestinian? Shane Warne? Their argument goes something like this. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is located south of Jerusalem in what is now known as the West Bank. Therefore, they say Jesus was Palestinian. It's only a matter of time before they insist that baby Jesus was wrapped in a keffiyeh and gently laid in a tunnel beneath Gaza, where he was visited by three wise men from Qatar bearing gifts of knives, AK-47s and rockets. I'm joking, but then again, nothing would surprise these days. Attempts to co-opt Jesus to a particular ideology are nothing new, of course. Depending on which social justice warrior you're talking to, Jesus was a socialist, a refugee, a communist, a pacifist, a member of the LGBTQ community, or an environmentally friendly vegan driving an EV with an arms are for hugging sticker on the rear bumper. Oddly enough, activists never describe Jesus as the divine incarnate at whose name every knee must bow. But we all know the pro-Palestinian mob don't need Jesus to be Lord and Saviour, they just need him to not be a Jew. And so, as the world paused to celebrate Jesus' birth, the Jew haters were insisting a Jew born to the Virgin Mary, also a Jew, whose lineage can be traced back to King David, obviously a Jew, was not in fact a Jew. Catholic priest Father Edward Beck went on CNN and with a straight face said this.
A Palestinian Jew born into a time when his country was occupied, right? They can't find a place for her to even give birth, his mother. They're homeless. They eventually have to flee as refugees into Egypt, no less. I mean, you can't make up the parallels to our current world situation right now.
He's totally making it up. Jesus was a Jew, born in the Jewish kingdom of Judea. Palestine didn't exist at the time of Jesus. It was around 100 years after Jesus that Roman Emperor Hadrian purged Judea of Jews and renamed the region Palestine as a slight to the Jews. And you'd think a priest, of all people, would know that Jesus' disciples were all Jews, that his message can't be understood apart from the Jewish faith, and that at his crucifixion, the Romans hung a sign over his head saying, King of the Jews. But suddenly Jesus is Palestinian? Only queers for Palestine would believe something so outrageous. Using Jesus to justify Hamas, as vandals did to this Boston nativity scene, takes some nerve. It's outrageous and insulting to both Jews and to Christians and to Jesus. If you hate Israel, well then just say so. But attempting to weaponise Christian identity in support of a terrorist organisation by claiming that Jesus was not a Jew is deceitful. The fact that Jesus was a Jew doesn't mean he would abandon the Palestinians, and it doesn't mean that Christians should abandon the Palestinians either. Jesus taught his followers to seek justice and to love their enemies, and that those two objectives were not mutually exclusive. In the current circumstance, it means supporting Israel's right to defend itself and to eliminate the forces of evil, seeking to wipe it from the map, while at the same time mourning the destruction required to accomplish those goals, since Jews and Palestinians are equally made in the image of God. Jesus taught us that, and Jesus was a Jew. Joining me to discuss this and more is Sophie Ellsworth of The Australian. Sophie, I don't know if you've seen this picture doing the rounds on social media. It's of Jesus dressed as a Hamas terrorist, suggesting that if Jesus was around, he'd be fighting against the Israelis. What's interesting to me is that if anyone dared to draw a picture of Muhammad, well, you just wouldn't, would you? So it's not only historically inaccurate, and it's not only the appropriation of a religious figure, but just the sheer hypocrisy of it.
Oh, look, James, great to be with you tonight. Look, I thought Christmas was off limits. I thought this time of year was pretty sacred and it didn't need to be weaponised like this. I have seen that imagery going around on social media, which I think is really disappointing. And just what you said in your editorial, the goings-on in the lead up to Christmas, the weaponising of Christmas, making this, a political game, really, I think is really disgraceful. And it should be such a special time for so many people around the world to be putting up these sort of images at this time of year. I think is pretty offensive to a lot of people, James, and it's totally unacceptable, whatever your views are when it comes to religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Christmas protests, the fallout from the Carols by Candlelight protest continues, with police now investigating whether or not the anti-Israel activists who got up on stage during the Melbourne Carols performance may have had inside help to get on stage. Now, the Australian newspaper that you write for reported today that insiders have asked why strict control of the event for participants didn't seem to have been applied to the protesters. Sophie, that's a worrying accusation, isn't it?
Well, James, let's just be clear here. It's an accusation at this point, so we don't know yet. But I was looking up tonight what you can actually take into the Carols. You cannot even take an esky into the Carols without getting that stripped off you. There's very tight controls when you go to these events, which a lot of us understand and accept now. You cannot take weapons. Now, one of these people who disrupted the Carols that night had some sort of weapon with them, but police have not said publicly what it is. So I wonder, how did they get there on stage, so close to the host there? People will be asking these questions, James. And also the fact that David Campbell, the host, said let them, along the lines of let them have their moment. Is he for real? I thought this was really alarming because if this was the Israeli side carrying on like this, I think they would be largely condemned. So let's see what comes of this. But I think it's very concerning if these accusations do come out to be true, that there was help.
Yeah, well, police are investigating those suggestions, and with others calling for more protests and disruptions, you'd hate to think that events like this will continue to be hijacked. Just on the host of the Carols, who you mentioned just a moment ago, David Campbell, you're right, he did say everyone needs to have their moment, which was an extraordinary thing to say. And I want to show him some grace because, when you're caught in a situation like that on the fly, you react immediately and your words aren't always what you would say on reflection. But I was reminded of the head of ASIO, who said just the other week that Palestinian street marches were a pressure release valve in the event that something worse might happen. And we continually ask, why do these things happen? You've got kids skipping school to protest against Israel. You've got all these other protests, motorcades through Jewish areas. We wonder why these things happen. Well, they keep being given permission to happen. If it's not the head of ASIO saying they're a pressure release valve, it's the host of Carols saying, well, everyone deserves their moment.
Well, look, you're exactly right, James. Look, David Campbell was in a situation which if you or I are in, I don't know. I can't predict how I would react, but I'm pretty sure if it was the shoe on the other foot, the reaction may have been quite different to this, James. So I think it's really concerning that we're seeing this play out the way it has. And look, it happened during COVID. We saw lockdowns in Victoria. And, you know, basically when people wanted to march for Black Lives Matter, absolutely fine. If you wanted to protest against the lockdowns, absolutely not. I mean, this is double standards that is just absurd. So I think people can see through this. And this is obviously such a heated debate. What is going on overseas? Everyone seems to have a view on it, whether they have knowledge or not. And I think it's really concerning when it seems that one side of the argument is given a bit of, extra leeway here, shall you say.
Another comment I wanted to ask you about from the Carol's host, David Campbell. He told the national television audience during the protest, well, we are in Melbourne, as if that explained the protest. Now, you're a Melbourne girl. What do you think he meant by that?
Oh, look, I mean, I don't want to, try and read his mind, but what is he saying that this is acceptable? Look, some pretty crazy stuff goes on in Melbourne. I don't think Melbourne is the city that it once was. It's a place a lot of us want to get out of at this time of the year. But when you see things like that unfold at what is meant to be such a special occasion, carols by candlelight, a celebration with very young children, ahead of Christmas, to be trashed like that and trashed on national TV is a disappointment for all, I think.
Well, Melbourne does have the AFL, so there are some good redeeming qualities. And you, of course, Sophie, for Melbourne. Let's skip topics because the storms have been a huge issue, obviously, over Christmas. Gold Coast Mayor Tom Tate has criticised the Bureau of Meteorology for failing to warn people of the storm that destroyed houses and left 60,000 homes without power when it hit on Christmas night. Now, he says the Bureau sent people communication at 9 p.m, warning that a wild storm would hit the Gold Coast at 8:45 p.m.
We'll be talking to BOM about what's going on regarding warning, because we can't warn people unless they gave us the data, and that part of it is not good enough.
What do you think about that for a lot of residents who didn't get that notice that this storm's going to hit?
I think it's unforgivable. So we've got to sort it that it doesn't happen again.
Now, this comes just days after the Bureau received criticism for failing to predict flooding in Cairns as a result of Cyclone Jasper. A lot of people find it difficult to understand how the Bureau can warn of sea level rises 100 years from now, but not a storm or flooding 24 hours in advance.
Well, James, if I'd to make light of a pretty serious situation, I'd say, better late than never for sending out the alert. But what are these 1,500 Bureau of Meteorology staff doing? Now, they get over $400 million or around that annually from the government, from the taxpayers, to keep them afloat. Now, a lot of their people who work for them, the personnel, I've been reading on this, have moved from regional locations into Brisbane. So that's probably completely useless. They're not in these areas and they're hitting, on their computer, let's send out the alert when the storm's even gone. I mean, how ridiculous. I think the Bureau is under a lot of pressure now. I did note the Queensland Premier coming out supporting them. But look, if you've got these situations coming, James, you want to know before they're coming. You don't want to know once the storm's damaged your home. Getting an email or a text is completely and utterly useless.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, listen, last week the ABC deleted and then reworked a TikTok video from one of their journalists whose reporting, if you could call it that, was incredibly biased against Israel. Here's part of that clip.
Israelis get killed, Palestinians just die. Language matters. Israelis are always killed. You can also use the word slaughtered, barbaric attacks, victims of terrorism when describing their tragic deaths. But for Palestinians, given the body count exceeds 10,000, best to keep it ambiguous. Like, all these Palestinians have died. We don't know how. Maybe they spontaneously combusted. Maybe it had something to do with a dodgy air fryer or a Tesla.
And a few weeks ago, the ABC TikTok account posted this exchange between podcaster Abby Chatfield, who said she would never feature a Zionist on her platform, and Greens leader Adam Bant, whom Chatfield described as, and I quote, and I'm serious, I'm not making this up, her Jesus. Take a look.
I guess you're my Jesus in some ways.
How do you feel to be Abby's Jesus?
I don't know. I've never been called that before.
I can't believe it. I'm actually almost fainted. So I'm equally excited. Is that a man? It's a man, Tony! It's a man!
Hello, Adam.
It's a man!
Look, everyone's here now.
Oh my God. This is incredible. Oh no! It's all happening!
It's your ABC. Now, we could talk all day about the ABC rubbish content on TikTok, but what I want to know, Sophie, is why the ABC continues to use TikTok at all. The Australian government's banned the Chinese-owned social media platform on all government devices because of security concerns. And this week, Australia's Privacy Commissioner has launched an inquiry into TikTok's handling of personal information. They say TikTok is harvesting people's email addresses, phone numbers and internet browsing history without consent. Why is the national broadcaster cultivating and promoting to Australians a social media platform that seems quite obviously so detrimental to Australians?
So, James, just on that first video with Antoinette Lattouf, that was on her own account. And she was an ABC radio host who got sacked for her comments that were anti-Israel on her social media. So that wasn't specifically on the ABC's account. But look, they put up a couple of videos in recent weeks. They've had to strip them down. Then they've put them up again, this anti-Israel type content. And as you said, they're still using TikTok when there's been alarm bells going off everywhere and concern now they're harvesting our information without our consent. 8 million Australians have TikTok accounts. This is owned by Chinese company ByteDance, and there's concerns what they are getting from our data. And so I think Australians should be on high alert. But the fact that the national broadcaster is using this is really quite ridiculous, really, because politicians have been told to shut down their accounts. Yeah. We've seen politicians leave their accounts. So I don't know what makes the national broadcaster immune from the risks of using TikTok.
Sophie Ellsworth, thank you for your time. Merry Christmas. Have a great new year. Always brilliant to speak to you. Coming up, the fallout from British actor Stephen Fry's Christmas message on anti-Semitism. It's been extraordinary. Spike chief political writer Brendan O'Neill will join me live from London to talk about it next. Welcome back to the program. Well, while King Charles was giving his Christmas message on the BBC, Stephen Fry was invited to give the alternate Christmas message on Channel 4. The much-loved British actor explained that he had Jewish heritage and asked his fellow Brits to exercise tolerance for each other, no matter their race or religion. Have a listen.
But whatever our opinions on what is happening, there can be no excuse for the behaviour of some of our citizens. Since October the 7th, there have been 50 separate reported incidents of anti-Semitism every single day in London alone, an increase of 1,350% according to the Metropolitan Police. So what is my message this Christmas? The simple truth that we're all brothers and sisters. It's naive, but it's as good a message as any other.
Let's bring in Spiked chief political writer Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, I would have thought that was all pretty good stuff, and yet as a result of that rather benign Christmas message, Stephen Fry has received the most vile abuse. What on earth is going on in England?
Yeah, you think no one could take offence at a message like that. You know, Stephen Fry is famously a national treasure here. He's very genteel. He's quite posh. He's loved widely across the country. And then he does this alternative Christmas message on the scourge of anti-Semitism. And the woke mob went absolutely bananas. They went crazy. They went on the internet. They called him every name under the sun, words I could never repeat on a show like this. They called him a narcissist. They said he's a genocide apologist in reference to Israel's war with Hamas. They really went for the jugular with Stephen Fry. And these are the kind of people who pose as anti-racist, who think everything is racist. If you ask someone, where are you from? Apparently that's a racial microaggression. If you say anything critical about Islam, apparently that's Islamophobia. These people see racism everywhere, except when it's staring them in the face. And there has been a severe rise in anti-Semitism in Britain over the past 10 weeks. And these people just don't want to know. They say they care about racism, but when it comes to anti-Jewish racism, they either turn away or they actually justify it as a form of opposition to Israel.
Yeah, well, it seems like the only form of racism that is permitted, and racism is terrible, but when it comes to anti-Semitism, somehow everybody just shrugs their shoulders and lets that go. But how is it that he can just simply warn people that anti-Semitism is not a great thing, and yet for his reward receive abuse? Doesn't that prove his point, that anti-Semitism is rife? You can't even warn against it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? You know, I think since Hamas's pogrom of the 7th of October, we've witnessed something really striking in the West, I think, which is the complete collapse of the moral authority of the woke left and the woke elites. You know, these are the kind of people who for years have posed as caring and loving and wonderful people who just want equality and just want everyone to be treated fairly and nicely. We now know, courtesy of the barbarism of 7th of October, what a myth that was, because they have made excuses for the pogrom of the 7th of October. They've said it was a form of resistance. There's one journalist here in Britain who called it a day of celebration. And since then, they have turned a blind eye to soaring levels of anti-Semitism in Britain and other countries in Europe as well. Here in the UK, there have been 50 anti-Semitic attacks a day in London alone. That is crisis-level racism, and they've turned a blind eye to that as well. And then when Stephen Fry tried to raise the alarm bells about it, they made fun of him on the internet and they denounced him. So the kind of people who've posed as our moral superiors for the past few decades have been exposed as real lowlifes, I think, who don't actually care about racism, don't care about equality, certainly don't care about Jewish people, and are only interested in using so-called anti-racism as a way of fortifying their own cultural power over society. So they really stand exposed. And I think the fallout from the Fry video really demonstrates that even further.
Just before we move on, I want to ask you one more question on this topic. You wrote regarding the Stephen Fry fiasco that confronting Islamists and woke anti-Semites is the pressing issue of our time. Now, I agree with you, but can you talk to me about this nexus between Islamists and the woke left? Because they would seem to have nothing at all in common, and yet they obviously do. How does that work?
Yeah, they do. You know, in France, they refer to it as the Islamo left. You know, in France, there are still some intellectuals and politicians who are willing to confront this strange nexus, as you describe it. And I think the Islamo left is a woke left that has become very sympathetic to radical Islam. And as you say, it's very strange, but I do think they share some things in common. Both sides are very hostile to Western civilization. We know that lots of young people in the West are now educated to turn their backs on Western civilization, to reject the dead white men of Enlightenment, and to reject white authors and so on and so forth. They're encouraged to see Western civilization as a racist construct, essentially. And of course, radical Islamists hate Western civilization as well. They both also think that Islamophobia is a crime that should be punishable. Anyone who criticizes Islam should be punished. The woke left calls it Islamophobia and the Islamists call it blasphemy, but it's the same thing. They want to silence their critics. And I think they both have a problem with Jews. You know, radical Islamists are upfront about their anti-Semitism, including Hamas. They're virulently anti-Semitic, whereas the woke left prefers to attack the Jewish state and to focus its hatred on Israel. But both of them have a problem with Jewish people. So there are these weird commonalities between the woke left and radical Islam, giving rise to what is called Islamo-leftism. And it is something that I think is very worrying and has a destructive impact on our societies.
Yeah, absolutely, and very well explained. Speaking of Israel, they're expanding their ground operation in Gaza as thousands of civilians attempt to flee the region. Tensions are escalating as well on the border with Lebanon as Israeli troops clash with Hezbollah forces. So there's a lot going on. And despite calls from world leaders, there's no signs that Benjamin Netanyahu is slowing down in his assault on Gaza. Should he be slowing down, or is he right to just keep pushing forward?
I think Israel has every right to try to destroy Hamas. You know, war is hell. War is always hell. The war in Gaza is hell, and there is an enormous amount of suffering there. No one is going to deny that. But I think a lot of the Western media coverage overlooks the fact that Hamas started this war with its pogrom in southern Israel on 7th of October. It's also refusing to end the war by, firstly, returning the Israeli hostages, and secondly, by surrendering on Israel's terms, which is what Hamas ought to be doing. It is the weaker party in this conflict, but it's refusing to surrender. And in fact, Hamas has made it perfectly clear that it will carry on attacking Israel and it will launch more 7th of Octobers. They've said that on numerous occasions over the past few weeks. So I think the Western activists and the Western journalists who are calling for a ceasefire now, they're not actually calling for a ceasefire. They're calling for Israel to capitulate.
Right.
They want Israel to capitulate to a movement that is violently anti-Semitic and which has promised to attack Israelis again. So no other state in the world would be expected to live next door to a violent racist movement that threatened to kill its civilians. And yet somehow the woke West expects Israel to put up with precisely that situation. They should be honest. They want Israel to surrender to the fascists of Hamas. That is what they are calling for when they say there should be a ceasefire right now. I think Israel has the right to pursue this terrorist movement. I wish there weren't so many civilian casualties. War is hell, which is why when this war ends with Hamas's defeat, that will be a great day.
Well, I mean, it's even worse than just capitulating with a ceasefire. The Egyptians have come up with a peace plan that includes Hamas having some sort of role in the ongoing governance of Gaza. Can you believe it? Now, the Israelis are considering parts of that plan by the Egyptians, particularly as pertaining the release of hostages. But you can see the pressure now building against Israel. France are pushing hard for a complete ceasefire. And it beggars belief that the world would seriously suggest not just a ceasefire, as you've so eloquently explained why that's a stupid move, but for an ongoing role of Hamas in Gaza.
You know, I really fear that the world is turning its back on Israel. I think that's what we're seeing. And I know everyone says, well, America loves Israel and gives it money and weapons, etc., and the West supports Israel. I'm not sure that's entirely true. I do think there is a sense of cowardice and creeping into Western capitals who now look at Israel and think, God, do we have to put up with this pesky little country? I do sense that attitude coming through amongst Western politicians, including in France, but also to a certain extent in the UK and even the US, where Biden has told Israel to essentially calm things down and try to come to some kind of arrangement. I think one problem that we face, and this is a difficult thing to say, but it is true, is that we now live in societies that don't really know what war is like and don't really think that anything is worth fighting a war for. That's the kind of societies we now live in. War is a distant memory for most of us in the West. We don't know what it's like to have to fight street battles with an enemy that wants to destroy your country and destroy your religion. We don't know what that's like, and yet we think we can dictate to Israel about how it should conduct itself in just such a conflict. You know, John Stuart Mill, the great liberal thinker of 19th century England, he said, war is an ugly thing, but it's not the ugliest things. Thinking that nothing is worth a war is even worse. And I think those are words to live by as we look at Israel and as it fights to defend its own existence. And we shouldn't be so quick to rush to judge Israel for doing what it thinks is right.
Brendan O'Neill, it's always a great privilege to talk to you. Thanks for being with me tonight. Well, Victoria's war on gas continues, with households and businesses facing hefty gas connection fees as the state marches relentlessly towards net zero. In 2025, gas connection fees will need to be paid up front in Victoria. Now, for homes, that will cost up to $2,500, and businesses could be hit with payments of up to $31,000. Let's bring in the Australian's environment editor, Graham Lloyd. This ridiculous push to renewables is only imposing greater costs on households and businesses when they can least afford it, Graham.
Yeah, it's good evening, James. Well, there's a common theme here, isn't there, that to maintain this view that renewables are the cheapest form of energy around, you have to make everything else more expensive to justify the claim. We're seeing it in electric vehicles. We saw it in the CSIRO report into the cost of nuclear. And certainly with gas, the game is to increase the costs so that it's no longer a valid consideration. The irony, of course, is that exploring for more gas is probably what is needed to facilitate the renewable sort of takeover of the energy system. But the ideology has got in the way, and I think there are green groups that would love to go around and rip up all the gas pipes tomorrow if they could get away with it.
This is the great irony, isn't it? I mean, we keep hearing about cost of living and the government's doing everything they can to address cost of living. It's the number one priority, and yet they keep instituting policies that put costs up.
Yeah, that's certainly what's happening.
Well, let's go to Tasmania, because Tasmania's got problems when it comes to renewables as well. I mean, they pride themselves on being self-sufficient, boasting 100% renewable energy. But there was an article in The Australian today saying that in Tasmania, they don't have enough energy generation to expand industry. They don't have enough power for transition from gas, or even to charge all the electric vehicles we're supposed to be driving in the future. What on earth is going on in Tasmania?
Well, James, there's a lot going on here. And if you look back in recent times, Tasmania has a proud history of a very low emissions electricity system based on its hydroelectricity. Now, increasingly, the mainland has been calling on that hydro to back up the national market, and that's leaving Tasmania short. So Tasmanian politicians are saying, look, we do not have the spare capacity now to grow our industry and do the things we would like to do. And part of that consideration is this big push to make Tasmania the battery of the nation. And that involves building lots and lots of wind farms across the northern coast of Tasmania to export that back to the mainland. And Tasmanians are being told, well, we need that power too. And it's possible to see it as part of the softening up process to try and get those big projects through.
So I've got to admit, I smirked when you said, they're going to make Tasmania the battery of the nation. It reminds me of, we're continually told Australia's going to be a renewable energy superpower. These terms that get thrown around by politicians, battery of the nation, renewable energy superpower. I mean, they're all completely meaningless, aren't they? It's wishful thinking.
Well, they're all really marketing slogans that get people's attention. But as you rightly point out, no one ever puts any flesh on the bones of what they actually mean. It's very difficult to see why being this renewable energy superpower is more feasible than being the actual energy superpower that we are today.
Especially, back to Victoria, when you consider they're sitting on amazing gas deposits, and yet they're pricing it out of the market. Just incredible. Graham Lloyd, thank you so much for your time. Coming up, Australians have voted for who they believe to be our most likeable politician. You won't believe who made top spot. Plus, Anthony Albanese under fire for signing a blank cheque to the Victorian Premier. All of that in just a moment. Welcome back. Well, Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong is being hailed a champion of same-sex marriage as she prepares to tie the knot with her long-term partner, Sophie Alowaic. The couple met nearly 18 years ago and share 2 daughters. Senator Wong voted against same-sex marriage in 2008 and in 2010 explained her opposition to redefining marriage in these terms. She said, "On the issue of marriage, I think the reality is there is a cultural, religious, historical view around that which we have to respect." Now, while she campaigned hard to legalise same-sex marriage in the lead-up to the plebiscite in 2017, she did dismiss the plebiscite itself as, quote, an expensive stunt. At the time, she said, "I am sure we can go through a whole range of things that $122 million can be spent on far better than a vote that is not going to be binding." Let's bring in our panel tonight, former Labor Minister Graham Richardson and New South Wales One Nation leader Tanya Mihalich. Graham, we all wish Penny Wong the very best, but is she a champion of same-sex marriage as is claimed by some journalists today?
Well, yeah, I think she can claim to be that now. I'm not sure it's always been the case, but it looks like it's the case at the moment.
Tanya, the Resolve poll published in the Sydney Morning Herald today found that Australians rate Foreign Minister Penny Wong as the nation's most impressive leader. So that's good timing with her wedding coming up. She's followed by Jackie Lambie, and then in third place, can you believe this, is Jacinta Price. Third. That's a farce, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I don't know who they're polling, certainly not anyone I know. Look, it's great PR for Penny, but, you know, one can't forget that only 6 months ago she was part of Mean Girls and leading the pack there. She's had a very interesting career. When she was Climate Change Minister, she was certainly despised by many Australians, and as we've just heard, she equivocated on the issue of gay marriage, losing people on both sides of the fence there. And, of course, led the pack with Mean Girls. It's extraordinary that she's now seen as the most likeable politician in Australia.
All right, Graham, I'll give you a free hit. Tell us why Penny Wong is so likeable. She's the most likeable politician in the country.
Hard to believe.
Well, she's always been a great mate of mine. I've known her for a long time. And I find Penny terrific company. She is a warm person, and she's obviously very, very bright. So I'm not at all surprised, and I congratulate her. I hope she stays around for a long, long time because Labor needs her.
Graham, what do you think about Jackie Lambie coming ahead of Jacinta Price?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, Jackie Lambie made, in my view, the best speech I've ever heard in the Australian Parliament, when she talked about how she was the only one in that Parliament who had ever been on the dole, and the experience of being poor. And it's true. I mean, most of the people who become politicians who get elected to Canberra are not poor. They never are. And she's the only one that ever conceded that she was. I've always rather liked her. I don't really know her, but I think she's certainly a force to be reckoned with.
She absolutely knows how to cut through in the media, that's for sure. She's always good for a quote. Tanya, just on this likeability poll, it was 1,600 people surveyed in this Resolve poll published in the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, I've got bad news for you. Are you ready?
Oh, no.
Your party leader, Pauline Hanson, she made the list as one of the least popular federal politicians. So give me your reaction to that. Why is she so unpopular?
I don't believe it. And I just met with Pauline in Central Coast a couple of weeks ago in December, and I can tell you there were queues of people wanting to have a photo with her there at one of the local clubs at Central Coast. So, look, again, don't know who they're polling here, but I wouldn't agree with that. I think Pauline is a very, very popular politician in Australia. Somebody who actually speaks her mind and stands up for ordinary Australians.
Since I put you on the spot, I'll give you some good news. They also polled for recognition, and the poll found she was better recognised than the opposition leader, Peter Dutton. So she's got that going for her. Look, let's get on to some more serious topics. Concerns are being raised over the government's $2.2 billion pledge to Victorians' suburban rail loop project. And Graham, I think the concerns are justified. This project purports to answer Victoria's transport and housing crisis by plonking high-density housing in existing suburbs where the rail loop will be built. But you've got residents in affected suburbs angry at having high-density housing forced on them. The plan does nothing to help people in Melbourne's outer suburbs where the population growth is actually occurring. And there's got to be serious concerns about whether the Victorian Labor government is able to manage a project of this size, about $200 billion in total, considering their abysmal track record. Now, if you live in Victoria, OK, you get the government you voted for, but why should the rest of Australia be stumping up huge money for something so dubious to be handled by the Victorian Labor government?
I actually think, and I'll surprise you with this, that's a reasonable question. I look at that proposal and I think to myself, my God, there must be things better to spend money on than that. I'm surprised that the Labor government in Victoria has stumped up so much for it already and is determined to keep going, because it just looks to me like one of those white elephants that you can just see before your very eyes is just going to tank. And I think the Labor government's popularity will tank with it unless they're very careful.
I mean, Tanya, you look at the way the Victorian Labor government has mismanaged their funds. And I mean, the current Premier, she was responsible for the Commonwealth Games fiasco. So you'd hardly be throwing more money after bad if you were Anthony Albanese.
Yeah, it's also a bit concerning that only recently Albo moved heaven and earth to ensure that Infrastructure Australia wouldn't have any opportunity to scrutinise this project, which I think is quite odd because he actually set up Infrastructure Australia when he was the minister back in the Rudd Labor government. So, you know, you'd want to scrutinise this project properly. I do find it concerning that they've just given it the green light. There's lots of red flags already being raised. Victoria's had form in cancelling projects in the past. We know the East-West Link was a disaster, $1.1 billion to the taxpayer. I can see why people are very concerned. And at the same time, you've got to remember they've said no to about 50 projects across Australia, including not providing the $1.4 billion that was needed to connect M7 to the M12 to the Western Sydney Airport, which you would think that would be a priority for the federal Labor government. So it's a very odd decision to make. You'd have to wonder who's in Albo's ear. But ultimately, it's one to watch, and I would hope that there'll be more scrutiny in relation to it because it is a big concern.
Well, speaking of odd goings-on, let's go to America for a moment. The Michigan Supreme Court has rejected an attempt to remove former President Donald Trump from the 2024 primary ballot. That's in contrast to Colorado, where a court ruled Trump ineligible to run for high office because of his involvement in the January 6 insurrection. And when I say involvement, Trump's involvement was to call for a peaceful protest. Graham, we're going to just face these legal challenges ongoing for the next number of months, aren't we? And doesn't the US presidential election, even the primaries for the Republican Party, face the prospect of being turned into a legal fiasco?
Well, I think not the prospect, the certainty. I don't think there's any doubt that these things are going to be decided in courts. They're not going to be decided by the people who should be making the decisions. They'll be decided by judges. And I don't think that's ever healthy for the political process. America's got obviously a very healthy democracy, and I don't think you should ever interfere with that. You should just let the process go. But you know, Trump is the kind of figure that is loved and feared, and you can't imagine the kind of division that he causes. You know, that you mention his name in America and you get incredible support for him, but you get a vicious hatred of him as well. So he's just such a controversial figure. I can't think of anyone as controversial as he in my lifetime, really.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to finish with one more quick question. I'll direct this to you, Tanya. At midnight on Sunday, we'll celebrate a new year, but 2024 isn't even here yet, and it's already feeling a little bit deja vu-ish. Curtin University Professor of Public Health, Jaya Dantas, is warning partygoers to mask up and avoid large crowds this New Year's Eve because COVID. It feels like we're back in 2020, Tanya.
Oh, look, I think people are really sick of being told what to do, and I've got to say, look, for those who have compromised immune systems or indeed are elderly, of course you should err on the side of caution. But for most people out there, COVID's nothing but a bad cold, and really the businesses out there, the pubs and clubs and bars and restaurants need people out there, and I just say to people, if you're healthy, go out and enjoy yourself, because I think everybody's had a gutful of being told what to do.
Tanya and Graham, thank you so much for your time. Well, after the break, Hezbollah confirms one of the Australians killed in Lebanon was a fighter for the listed terrorist organisation. I'll have more on that coming up next. Well, Australians in southern Lebanon are being told to leave after 2 Australian brothers were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Hezbollah claims one of the Australians killed was fighting for them, and they gave him and his brother a funeral complete with Hezbollah flags draped over the coffins. Now, Attorney General Mark Dreyfus has told journalists that full consular assistance will be made available to the family. But how does that work when a listed terror organisation claims at least one of the family was working with them? Let's bring in Deputy Nationals leader Perrin Davey. Mark Dreyfus was coy when asked about claims one of the men was fighting for Hezbollah. Shouldn't he be all over this as the Attorney General?
Well, we would certainly want to make sure that, DFAT are doing all they can to verify the claims. At the moment, it's the claims by Hezbollah. It wouldn't be the first time terrorist organisations have jumped on board to lay claims where they're not founded. But it is concerning, and Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation. And no Australian should be getting involved with Hezbollah or Hamas or any other terrorist organisation around the world. So it is a concern, but I do think it is fair and fitting that consular assistance is made available to the families, because let's not tar a whole family by the actions of one if it is true. And let's remember, this is a family, an Australian family, who've lost their sons and their daughter-in-law. So we must think of that and offer the consular assistance that we would offer any Australian who's lost overseas.
Well, let me ask you this. How was the Albanese government able to perform full security checks almost overnight on nearly 1,000 people it proposes to bring here from Gaza, but doesn't appear to know the background of one Aussie openly named by Hezbollah as one of their own?
And it's very true, but we also don't know when this person became involved with Hezbollah. Did they become involved from Australia, which we've seen in past cases with people getting engaged with Islamic State from Australia and getting radicalised from here? We haven't got any of the background of this gentleman or his family that's been out in the public domain. I can totally understand why Australians are very concerned, particularly when, as you say, we are told that we are across, I think it's about 800 people that we are bringing in from Gaza, and we've been able to perform full security checks. Well, I'm not convinced, and I want some more reassurance that those security checks have been robust and that each and every one of those people that we're bringing over has a legitimate claim to come here, which we were told, but we haven't seen any proof or any details of.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I want to get your thoughts on the storms which have destroyed tens of thousands, just destroyed homes in Queensland. We've had people die tragically. There's been criticism of the Bureau of Meteorology for not offering advanced warnings. And now there's criticism of, the SES and the government for failing to provide help for people. Some people being told they'll be without electricity. This is in southeast Queensland until maybe after the new year. Do you think the government's doing enough to help people that have been hit by this freak weather event, or should more be done?
Well, and I will also say there was freak weather events along the Murray River near where I am too. We saw the main highway in Western Victoria cut off, and a massive rain bomb hit 4 Shire councils there as well. There are questions that need to be asked of the Bureau of Meteorology. This is an agency that claims to be able to look into the future, that claims to be able to tell us what our weather is going to do in 50 years' time and how the climate is changing, but somehow can't get a forecast 24, 48 hours in advance right. So I think we need to ask legitimate questions. I will not say that the SES are not doing enough. I want to thank every single one of the SES volunteers across every state who have put their time aside, left their families to go and help others. And when it comes to power, let's not forget, our SES volunteers are not necessarily trained in being able to reconnect power. That is up to the power companies. They need to get out there.
I'm going to have to cut in there because we've run out of time. But you're absolutely right. The SES do perform a great service. Thanks for your time. Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow. But up next, The Secrets of My Success, a series about Australia's most successful entrepreneurs.